Good evening. Thank you. Welcome.
Hvala, dobrodošli.
It's been 3 years since I came to Zagreb.
Prošlo je 3 godine kad sam bio u Zagrebu.
And it's really a pleasure to return.
Doista mi je drago da se vraćam.
Tonight I'm going to talk about some things that I'm working out for a new book.
Danas ću govoriti o nekim stvarima na kojima radim za novu knjigu.
So very much in process, but I better hurry up and finish this damn book. It's too big and too long.
Trenutno radim na tome, ali bolje da je završim što prije, jer prevelika i predugačka.
And I'm in the middle of a tour, and so I'm really not sure where I am in my head or geographically. I think I know, but I'm a little mixed up right now.
Usred sam turneje, ali trenutno ne znam u glavi gdje sam, malo mi je sve pomiješano.
So anyway, I hope to say some things tonight that interest you, that concern what I call the animal standpoint.
Nadam se da ću vam danas reći neke stvari koje bi vas mogle zanimati i što ja zovem životinjskim stajalištem.
And this means looking at really all social reality from a different perspective, not from the human eyes, but from the eyes of the animal.
To znači promatrati društvenu stvarnost ne iz oka čovjeka, nego iz oka životinja.
And sometimes I mean this literally, that we literally need to understand reality as an animal sees it, as an animal feels it, as an animal experiences us, the human.
Ponekad to mislim doslovno, kako to životinja vidi, osjeća kako vidi nas i osjeća nas kao ljude.
And of course I'm talking about the human animal and not any dualism within the evolutionary community.
Naravno govorimo o ljudskoj životinji.
So sometimes, yes, literally, when we look at things from the animal standpoint, we want to know what the animal might see or how it might feel.
Kad gledamo iz životinjskog stajališta, želimo vidjeti kako se životinja osjeća i što ona vidi.
But also, by the animal standpoint, I mean looking at history, ethics, and tactics from our interrelationship with animals.
Znači sa životinjskog stajališta gledati povijest, etiku i taktiku što se tiče našeg odnosa sa životinjama.
So in terms of history, for instance, I'll say some things about that. When we look at history from the animal standpoint, obviously we're not looking at it in terms of how animals might see history, although that would be interesting.
Gledamo povijest sa životinjskog stajališta, ne gledamo kako životinje mogu gledati povijest, iako bi to moglo biti zanimljivo.
In that sense, the animal standpoint means our relationship with animals, how we have treated animals, how we have co-evolved with animals.
To sa životinjskog stajališta znači naš odnos sa životinjama, kako smo evoluirali zajedno sa životinjama i kako smo ih tretirali.
And this has both positive and negative aspects.
I to ima svoje pozitivne i negativne aspekte.
The positive aspects have been that for so long in our history, our interactions with animals have shaped our minds. They provoked thinking itself. They stimulated our world. They were our world. They were the most exciting things on planet Earth.
Sa povijesnog aspekta životinje su stimulirale naše umove. One su bile iznimno zanimljive, one su oblikovale naš svijet.
And animals have played a vital role in our psychological development, our conceptual development, in our psychic and spiritual lives.
One su odigrale presudnu ulogu u razvoju naših psiholoških i duhovnih života.
But mostly I want to look at the negative aspect of this in terms of our oppression of animals and how speciesism is the foundation of other systems of domination.
Ja prije svega želim gledati negativne aspekte, našu dominaciju nad životinjama i kako je specizam temelj svih drugih dominacija ili iskorištavanja.
Such that what we do to the animals, we do to ourselves.
Poput ono što činimo životinjama, činimo samima sebi.
So, this is something I call animal standpoint theory.
To je nešto što ja zovem teorijom životinjskog stajališta.
And it's a particular kind of perspective on the world.
To je posebna vrsta svjetonazora.
And we can begin with Nietzsche's theory of perspectivism.
Možemo početi sa Nietzscheom i njegovom teorijom perspektivitizma.
And Nietzsche said that the way we look at the world usually is in terms of one perspective, one single framework.
Nietzsche je rekao da na svijet gledamo obično samo s jednog stajališta, i u određenim okvirima.
And so we have a very limited understanding of the world, and yet the world is very complex.
I stoga imamo vrlo ograničeno razumijevanje svijeta, iako je on vrlo složen.
And so the more perspectives we can have on reality, the more of the richness of reality we can grasp in our mind.
Što više gledišta na stvarnost imamo, to više možemo bogatstva te stvarnosti imati u umu.
So according to Nietzsche, there is no truth, there is no explanation, there's only interpretation.
Znači, prema Nietzscheu nema istine, ima samo tumačenja.
But the more handles we have, the more ways of seeing that we have, the more of the richness of reality we can understand.
Što više načina gledanja na stvarnost imamo, to više bogatstva stvarnosti možemo razumjeti.
And so the animal standpoint is looking at history in a totally new way.
Životinjsko stajalište predstavlja pogled na svijet, na povijest na posve novi način.
Now I'm suggesting that we cannot understand our position here in time and space right now unless we look at history through the animal standpoint.
Ja tvrdim da mi ne možemo razumjeti naš položaj sada i ovdje u vremenu bez da ne promotrimo životinjsko stajalište.
That we cannot understand the psychological crisis of human violence and human alienation without looking at history from the animal standpoint.
Da ne možemo shvatiti krizu ljudske otuđenosti i nasilja bez gledanja životinjskog stajališta.
We cannot understand the origin and the evolution of dominator cultures unless we look at history from the animal standpoint.
Da ne možemo razumjeti porijeklo društava dominacije ako ne pogledamo životinjsko stajalište.
That we cannot understand the ecological crisis, climate change, species extinction, and every facet of the global environmental crisis unless we look at it from the animal standpoint.
Da ne možemo razumjeti ekološku krizu, klimatske promjene, izumiranje vrsta bez gledanja životinjskog stajališta.
The animal standpoint also is part of other critical standpoints that have emerged in feminist theory and critical race theory.
Životinjsko stajalište je dio teorija koje su se pojavile unutar feminizma i kritički
Anti-racist and anti-colonial theory.
protiv rasizma i kolonijalizma.
In other words, it is part of a larger critical tradition that also includes leftist history.
Znači, to je dio tradicije koja također uključuje ljevicu.
So for instance, there's something called feminist standpoint theory, which looks at modern history or history of recent centuries from the female standpoint.
Postoji feministička teorija feminističkog stajališta koja gleda na povijest sa stajališta feminizma.
And that there are certain facets of social and psychological reality we cannot explain so long as we exclude a feminist theory.
I da postoje neki dijelovi društvene realnosti koju ne možemo objasniti ako ne gledamo, ako ne uzmemo u obzir feminističku teoriju.
So for instance, Carolyn Merchant, who was one of the first ecofeminists, a term that was coined in 1973, wrote a book called The Death of Nature.
Carolyn Merchant je bila jedna od prvih ekofeministica koja je 1973. napisala knjigu Smrt prirode.
And The Death of Nature is what we call an ecofeminist work because it combines principles of ecology and feminism.
Smrt prirode je ekofeminističko djelo, zato kombinira teme feminizma i ekologije.
And that means, for instance, that Merchant sees the ecological crisis and our alienation from nature to be not a human-caused phenomenon in general, but much more a male-caused problem.
Znači ona vidi naš problem alienacije i uništenja okoliša ne kao nešto što su uzrokovali ljudi, nego više muškarci.
So instead of talking about anthropocentrism, which is a human-centered worldview, a human domination of the world. We would be talking more specifically of androcentrism, a male-dominated worldview, not just human. You see, there's a difference.
Znači, umjesto da govorimo o antropocentrizmu, o dominaciji ljudi nad svijetom, govorimo o androcentrizmu, znači dominaciji muškaraca nad svijetom, što je velika razlika.
So Merchant would insist that our alienation from nature, our pathological control or need to control nature, such as we see in the modern world, is not a human phenomenon generally, but a male phenomenon distinctly.
Znači, ona kaže da naša potreba da dominiramo nad prirodom i naša otuđenost od prirode nije pojava svojstvena čovječanstvu, nego muškarcima.
So when you read the works of Bacon and Descartes in the 17th century, and they talk about possessing nature, mastering nature, dominating nature, bending nature to the human will, such that we can, this is a quote, penetrate her inner secrets, we know we are hearing a male viewpoint on the natural world.
Znači, kad su Bacon i Descartes u 17. stoljeću govorili o slamanju prirode, pojavljivanju prirode, da bismo mogli penetrirati u nju, onda znamo da se radi o muškom stajalištu.
So you see the point that if we look at the ecological crisis from a feminist standpoint, we can understand new things that we can't understand without the feminist viewpoint.
A na tom primjeru onda vidite da ako uzmemo u obzir feminističko stajalište, da možemo razumjeti nove stvari koje bez tog stajališta ne bismo razumjeli.
Similarly, how can we understand capitalism and the origins of the modern world without understanding slavery from a critical race standpoint?
Slično tome, kako bismo razumjeli kapitalizam ako ne gledamo svijet sa stajališta kritične rase.
Because Marx said that capitalism, which one might say originated in the 15th century with colonialism, came into the world dripping with blood.
I didn't...
Try it again.
Yeah.
The Marxism came into the world dripping with blood because of its origins in colonialism.
Marksizam je zbog svojeg podrijetla u kolonijalizmu. Kapitalizam.
Colonialism, the European domination of people of Africa and other cultures. And Marx called colonialism the primitive accumulation of capital.
Marks je kolonijalizam nazvao primitivnom akumulacijom kapitala.
In other words, the great cities of Europe, the architecture, the Renaissance, the philosophy, and the artwork, all were dependent upon the system of slavery. All were enabled by colonial seizures of African peoples and cultures and the system of slavery.
Drugim riječima, svi oni renesansni gradovi, svo bogatstvo, sva kultura, njih su omogućili sustavi robovlasništva.
So we can't understand colonialism, we can't understand capitalism without understanding slavery, and we can't understand slavery without critical race theory.
Ne možemo razumjeti kapitalizam ako ne razumijemo ropstvo, a ropstvo ne možemo razumjeti bez rasne teorije.
So I'm giving you some examples of what standpoint theory is, of what it is like, how powerful it is to look at the world from the oppressed point of view, not the oppressor's point of view.
Da vam primjer šta omogućava ta teorija stajališta, gledati svijet sa stajališta potlačenih, a ne sa stajališta dominatora, vladara.
So what is unique about the Marxist historical tradition in general is to look at history from below, not from above.
Znači, sa marksističkog stajališta je zanimljivo gledati na povijest, promatrati povijest odozdola, ne odozgora.
That means we look at history from the standpoint of the working class, of the proletariat, of the oppressed, and not from the standpoint of the bankers, the capitalists, or the elite, or kings and princes.
To znači da na povijest gledamo kroz oči radnika, proletarijata, a ne kroz oči bankara, princeza, kraljeva.
And when we look at history from the standpoint of the victims rather than the victimizers, we have a radically different understanding of human history.
A ako promatramo povijest sa stajališta žrtve, onda ćemo dobiti posve drugo shvaćanje ljudske povijesti.
So it's a kind of turning of the tables to look at things from a new perspective.
Tako da čini se da su sad tu neke stvari okrenule.
Can you imagine a more dramatic turning of the tables than looking at history from the animal's perspective?
Možete li zamisliti veći obrat nego od toga da gledate na povijest sa perspektive životinja?
Than looking at history from the way we have related to other animals on this planet?
Da promatrate povijest sa stajališta našeg odnosa prema drugim životinjama na ovom planetu.
This is very new.
To je vrlo novo.
I'm not claiming to have invented this theory. There are some good anthropologists who have started down this path decades ago.
Ja ne tvrdim da sam izumio tu teoriju, već su neki jako poznati antropolozi s time krenuli prije nekoliko desetljeća.
However, this road is barely cleared.
Međutim, niko nije još utabao tu stazu.
So I want to continue clearing it to see what lies ahead in our future.
Ja ću nastaviti tabati tom stazom pa
To see how we have gotten to this point.
da vidimo kako smo došli do ovog.
To see where we are now.
Gdje smo sada.
And so much is revealed to us when we look at history from our co-evolution positively or negatively with fellow animals.
Toliko toga ćemo saznati ako na povijest gledamo sa stajališta našeg odnosa, bio on pozitivan ili negativan sa životinjama.
If you ask yourself, what is the most dramatic revolution in history?
A jeste li se pitali koja je najdramatičnija revolucija u povijesti?
Some people would say, clearly, capitalist industrialism, the Industrial Revolution and the capitalist revolution in the modern world.
Neki ljudi bi rekli očito kapitalistička i industrijalistička revolucija.
Other people might say the emergence of Western society, the development of Western culture has been the most significant event in world history.
Pojava zapadne kulture i zapadnog društva.
Closer to the truth, one of the most significant events, if not the most significant event, was the emergence of agricultural society 10,000 years ago.
Znači, bliže istini bi bio pojava poljoprivrednog društva prije 10.000 godina.
But we can go back one step further to one of the most significant changes ever in history, and that is when humans no longer were prey, but became predators.
Možemo otići još jedan korak dalje u povijest, to je najveća revolucija, to je kad ljudi više nisu bili lovina, nego kad su postali grabežljici.
There is this myth in history, in the anthropology book still today, it's called Man the Hunter. Postoji
taj mit u knjigama o antropologiji o čovjeku lovcu.
Well, throughout most of our evolution, and we have lived as bipedal animals or in a homo form for 5 to 7 million years.
Većinu naše evolucija, to je od 5 do 7 milijuna godina od kad hodamo na dvije noge.
We were the prey, not the predators.
Mi smo bili lovina, a ne grabežljici.
We were the hunted, not the hunters.
Nas su lovili, mi nismo lovili.
And we did not live as carnivores or meat eaters. We led largely a vegetarian, plant-based diet and lifestyle.
Nismo bili mesojedi, nego smo se uglavnom jeli biljkama.
For millions of years.
Milijunima godina.
And any animals that we ate are called carrion, or animals that have already been killed. We ate what was left.
A one životinje koje smo jeli, zovemo ih lešinama, znači one koje su već bile mrtve.
Or small scale hunting we might have practiced for millions of years.
Mi smo prakticirali lov malih životinja.
But we did not become the strongest animal in terms of power on this planet until about 60,000 years ago.
Ali mi smo postali najjača životinja na ovom planetu sve do prije 60.000 godina.
Because that is when we developed the technology of the spear.
Jer tada smo izumili tehnologiju koplja.
And this simple object was powerful enough to change the dynamics of history.
a taj jednostavni predmet je bio dovoljno moćan da promijeni dinamiku povijesti.
Because with 10, 12, 20 people, all with spears, surrounding an animal, we could bring down large animals that brought down us.
Jer uz 10-20 ljudi koji su bacili koplja oko životinja mogli smo ubiti koja je prije mogla ubiti nas.
And that is when we became the most powerful animal on the planet.
I tada smo postali najmoćnija životinja na
When
planetu.
we use this forebrain that we have, which is so problematic, possibly programmed for violence, to kill systematically other species that always killed us.
Kada smo počeli koristiti ovaj čelni dio mozga da ubijamo životinje koje su uvijek ubijale nas.
So we began to get a sense of our power over other animals.
Dobili smo osjećaj moći nad drugim životinjama.
We began to feel different from other animals.
Počeli smo se osjećati različiti od drugih životinja.
We began to feel different from the natural world the more we learned how to control it for our purposes.
Počeli smo se osjećati različitima od prirodnog svijeta i sve smo ga više počeli koristiti za naše svrhe.
And now let's fast forward in time to the beginning of agricultural society 10,000 years ago.
Sada idemo naprijed u vremenu sve do 10.000 godina, prije 10.000 godina kada je počelo poljoprivredno društvo.
Because now we have a very clear shift in history from hunting and gathering tribes that were nomadic
Jer tada se dogodio prijelaz sa plemena koja su selila i koja su bila nomadska i lovačka
to settled agricultural societies.
Do sjedilačkog načina života.
This is what we call civilization.
To je ono što zovemo civilizacija.
Civilization began 10,000 years ago, once again.
Civilizacija je, ponovit ću, počela prije 10.000 godina.
That is when we began to domesticate the wild.
Tada smo počeli pripitomljavati životinje.
We learned how to plant crops, not just take what food fell from a tree or what roots we might find. We learned how to plant and cultivate crops.
Naučili smo saditi i uzgajati usjeve, ne samo kupiti korijene ili plodove koje su padale sa drveća.
And we began to domesticate animals.
I počeli smo proces pripitomljavanja
We
životinja.
began to breed the wild out of them.
Počeli smo, iskorijenili smo divljinu iz njih.
And we began to turn them into our slaves.
I počeli smo njih stvarati naše robove.
Cropping their ears, castration, breeding control, cages, confinement, rope, systems of labor. This was the basis of civilization.
Rezali smo im uši, kastrirali smo ih, zatvarali u kaveze, vezali užima. Sve je to bio proces dominacije.
So, before this happened 10,000 years ago, we developed language 40 to 50,000 years ago.
Prije toga, prije 40 do 50.000 godina razvili smo jezik.
By now, with agricultural society, we had the system that we call speciesism.
Sa poljoprivrednim društvom smo došli do sustava koji se zove specizam.
The idea that we are the superior species over all other animals, we have the right to use them as means to our ends.
Ideja da smo nadmoćni svim drugim životinjama i da zbog toga imamo pravo koristiti kao sredstva za naše ciljeve.
And so we began to do this in agricultural society in a very powerful way. And by now, we had language to articulate the concept of us as different from nature and us as superior animals.
Toga smo to počeli raditi u poljoprivrednom društvu i sad smo imali jezik da uobličimo ono što radimo životinjama, to jest da možemo reći da smo mi nadmoćni njima.
And so what happens in history when we find agricultural societies? We find the same pattern of events everywhere.
Što se događa u povijesti, uvijek vidimo isti obrazac događaja.
We find societies that begin to grow in population because they can produce greater food surplus.
Vidimo da su društva počela, da su njihove populacije počele rasti jer su imale višak hrane.
We find the emergence of classes and the state and armies and warfare.
U njima se pojavljuju staleži, država, ratovi.
And we find cultures that are based upon herding animals, taking large animals like cattle and moving with them from place to place because cattle need a lot of land.
Našli smo društva u kojima u kojima se upravlja krdima životinja koje se sele s jednog mjesta na drugo, zato životinje trebaju mnogo zemlje.
Herding cultures were expansionistic cultures, and they inevitably provoked war with other cultures.
Ta stočarska društva su u svojoj prirodi imala širenje i zbog toga je dolazilo do ratova sa drugim društvima.
Human slavery began with the captives taken from other armies or competing forces in these wars, driven by herding cultures.
Ljudsko ropstvo je počelo sa uzimanjem zarobljenika iz protivničkih plemena i zato smo na njihov teritorij ganjali našu stoku.
So you see, the domestication of the wild, in particular, the domestication of animals, was a very decisive event in human history and drove a lot of important change.
Stoga je zbog toga pripitomljavanje životinja bio vrlo važan događaj u ljudskoj povijesti i doveo do mnogih promjena.
If we look at history in terms of everything is created by God, we'll completely miss this.
Ako mislimo o povijesti kao da je sve stvorio Bog, onda nećemo ništa shvatiti.
If we adopt the perspective of environmental determinism, so that geography shapes everything unique about human culture, we will completely miss this.
Ako prihvatimo stajalište ekološkog determinizma kao da geografija utječe na sve, onda opet nećemo ništa shvatiti.
If we adopt the Marxist perspective that history is the history of class struggle, we will completely miss this.
Ako prihvatimo marksističku doktrinu da je povijest klasne borbe, onda ćemo opet sve fulati.
It is only by adopting the animal standpoint we come to realize how we shaped our human identities and how we shaped society and where oppression begins.
Samo ako prihvatimo životinjsku perspektivu, onda ćemo shvatiti našu povijest i gdje počinje tlačenje.
Because very quickly the idea is this.
Ukratko, ovo je ideja.
When you say, what is a human being, or you ask other human beings, what kind of being are you, they are going to say that they are the most important being on the planet, they are the most special being, and you ask why, they will say, because we have rationality.
Kada pitate druge ko je to čovjek, oni će reći da je čovjek najvažnije biće na svijetu, zato čovjek posjeduje razum.
Where do we get the idea that we are rational animals?
Odakle nam ideja da smo mi razumne životinje?
Except by distinguishing ourselves from non-human animals.
Osim ako se nismo već odijelili od neljudskih životinja.
Except by underestimating their intelligence and overestimating ours.
Osim ako nismo podcijenili njihovu inteligenciju i nadcijenili našu.
So speciesism is the idea that we have the right to exploit other animals because we are superior, and we are superior because we are rational animals.
Znači, specizam znači da imamo pravo iskorištavati druge životinje, zato smo nadmoćni, a nadmoćni smo, zato smo razumne životinje.
That was the first hierarchy in history, human over non-human animal.
To je bila prva hijerarhija u povijesti ljudi nad životinjama.
Now can you see how sexism or patriarchy could come out of this system?
Svačite li sada kako su iz tog sustava mogli nastati seksizam i patrijarhat?
Can you see how racism and colonialism might come out of this system?
Svačite li kako su iz toga mogli nastati rasizam i kolonijalizam?
Because we have created a category of beings we call non-rational or merely animal.
Jer smo stvorili kategoriju bića koje zovemo nerazumnima ili jednostavno životinjama.
We have said they're radically different from us.
Koje su radikalno drugčije od nas.
And that they don't have any moral value.
I koji nemaju nikakvu moralnu vrijednost.
They are merely resources for our use.
Oni su samo sredstva za našu uporabu.
At one time the world was populated with spirits, animal spirits and human spirits, and we were all equal.
U jednom trenutku u svijet je bio nastavljen ljudskim i životinjskim dušama i svi smo mi bili jednaki.
At one time in history we revered animals and we were humbled by our place in the world.
U jednom trenutku u povijesti štovali smo životinje i obožavali ih i bili smo skromni.
But now, after agricultural society, animals became resources, objects, property, and commodities.
Nakon poljoprivredne revolucije životinje su postale predmeti, vlasništvo i roba.
And once we use animals to create this category of the non-rational, the beings without value, all we had to do to exploit other humans was to put them in that same category.
Jednom kad smo pomoću životinja stvorili kategoriju nerazumnih bića, nevažnih bića, onda smo mogli druge ljude samo staviti u tu istu kategoriju.
So by the time you encounter the Bible, the Old Testament, and you see that God is a male, and you see talk about Jesus and shepherds and shepherders and flock, you know that you're reading a book that came out of agricultural society.
Kada čitate Bibliju u kojoj je Bog muškarac, kada čitate o stadima, o pastirima, onda znate da čitate knjigu koja je nastala u poljoprivrednom, odnosno stočarskom društvu.
You see a society that is now patriarchal. Patriarchy did not exist before agricultural society. Men and women were equal.
Patriarhat nije postojao prije poljoprivredne revolucije, muškarci i žene su bili jednaki.
The idea of man the hunter always left out. The idea of women the gatherers.
Ideja o muškarcu, o lovcu je uvijek izostavljala ideju o ženi skupljačici.
So what does patriarchal culture say about women?
Što patriarhat govori o ženama?
It says they're inferior to men.
Ono kaže da su one inferiorne.
Why are they inferior to men?
Zašto su inferiorne?
Because they don't have the same level of rational thought.
Zato jer nemaju istu razinu, istu moć razmišljanja.
And if you go back and read your Western civilization textbooks, you will see every philosopher from Aristotle to Rousseau up to the modern world, to the contemporary world, they say the same thing.
Ako čitate, znači, filozofske knjige iz povijesti, vidjet ćete da je svaki filozof od Aristotela do Rousseaua, do suvremenih mislioca da govore istu stvar.
Speciesism is the foundation of patriarchy.
Specizam je temelj patrijarhata.
Speciesism is the foundation of racism and colonialism.
Specizam je temelj rasizma i kolonijalizma.
Because all we have to do to colonize the people of Africa or dark-skinned islanders, as the European system is beginning to emerge, is to say they are not humans, they are animals, they are beasts, they are brutes, they are governed by instinct, they are savages.
Sve što nam je bilo potrebno da podjarimo Afriku i njihov narod je da kažemo da oni nisu ljudi, oni su životinje, oni su divljaci, oni ne mogu razmišljati.
All we have to do is drag them into this category that we started with animals, the category of the non-rational, of the unrational, the irrational.
Samo smo ih trebali svrstati u tu kategoriju koja je počela sa životinjama, ta kategorija uključuje ona bića koja nisu racionalna.
So you see in every war, whether it's a colonial war, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the enemy is always reduced to a subhuman.
U svakom ratu, bilo rat vijetnamski ili u Iraku, neprijatelj se uvijek svodi na nešto što nije čovjek.
The enemy is always called animal, dog, beast, savage.
Uvijek ga zovu životinjom, psom, divljakom.
And that makes killing easy.
I zbog toga je ubijanje lagano.
Because our nature is very conflicted. We both love violence and we are appalled by violence.
Jer naša priroda je vrlo konfliktna i volimo životinje, ali i grozimo. I volimo nasilje, ali i grozimo ga se.
And you cannot train soldiers to kill until you teach them the enemy is not human.
I ne možete utrenirati vojnike da ubijaju sve dok ih ne naučite da neprijatelj nije čovjek.
So before sword play, there is always word play.
Znači prije mahanja mačevima uvijek postoji mahanje riječima.
So you get the point that speciesism is connected to racism and to sexism. We could also say ableism, the discrimination against people who are not normal.
Dakle, sad shvaćate da je specizam povezan sa seksizmom, sa rasizmom, sa tim nekim drugim diskriminacijama ljudi koje smatramo nenormalnima.
Do you see how looking at history from the animal standpoint can yield rich and new insights?
Shvaćate li kakve nove uvide možemo dobiti ako promotrimo povijest sa životinjskog stajališta?
Before colonialism, before racism, before sexism, before class, there was speciesism and the domestication of the wild.
Prije kolonijalizma, seksizma, prije staleža dogodio se specizam.
So that's how I would apply standpoint theory to history, and I'm working out many of the details of this.
Tako bih primijenio teoriju stajališta na povijest.
I like to also apply it to ethics.
Također bih je primijenio i na etiku.
And here in ethics, if we apply the animal standpoint theory, we get a completely different system of ethics and species ethics.
Ako primijenimo teoriju stajališta, životinjskog stajališta, dobit ćemo posve novi sustav etike.
Now here, for instance, is where I would apply the animal standpoint literally.
Ovdje ću doslovno primijeniti stajalište, životinjsko stajalište.
Oh, we think we're great beings, don't we? We think we're a great species, don't we?
Mi mislimo da smo velika bića i velika
We're the best, we're the most superior, we're the most ethical.
Da smo najnapredniji i najetičnija bića.
We forget whatever we have in terms of intelligence or moral capacity or moral sentiment. It all came from evolution and from animals.
Zaboravljamo da sve što imamo u vezi inteligencije ili morala, da je sve to poteklo od životinja.
But imagine if animals could judge us in our own words, what would they say?
Ali zamislite kada bi životinje nas mogle prosuditi svojim riječima, što bi one rekle?
If you don't like profanity, you would not want to be in the room.
Ako ne volite prostote, onda ne biste to htjeli čuti.
They would say, like Isaac Bashevis the singer said about humans in relation to animals, all men or all humans are Nazis in relation to animals.
Oni bi rekli poput Izaka Baševisa singera da su u odnosu na životinje svi ljudi nacisti.
They would say, along with the 18th century theologian William Ralph Inge, that if the animals ever created a devil, it would assume the human form.
Oni bi rekli kao teolog iz 18. stoljeća William Ralph Inge da kada bi životinje mogle uobličiti ili stvoriti sliku vraga, on bi imao ljudsko obličje.
So, because animals can't tell us exactly what they think about us, we have to sometimes look at their actions toward us.
Budući da one ne mogu uvijek reći nešto nama, moramo promotriti njihovo ponašanje prema nama.
There's a new book I strongly recommend. I'm really mad I didn't write it.
Preporučam vam ovu knjigu, stvarno sam ljut što je nisam napisao, što ja nisam napisao.
Because I've had some similar ideas, but this bastard beat me to it.
Jer sam imao slične ideje, ali to me kopilo
It's by an American writer called Jason Ribal.
Američki pisac Jason Ribal.
R-H-I-B-A-L. I'm sorry, H-R-I-B-A-L.
H-R-I-B-L-E.
Never mind. It's called Fear of the Animal Planet.
Zove se Strah od životinjskog planeta.
Now, what is important about this book is that he shows that there is a history of animal resistance to human power.
Što je zanimljivo kod te knjige, on pokazuje da postoji otpor životinja prema ljudima.
We know this, don't we? But we don't think about this as a systematic phenomenon. We don't think about this meaning that animals have a desire to be free.
Mi to znamo, ali mi ne razmišljamo na taj način. Mi ne želimo razmišljati da životinje imaju želju da budu slobodne.
We know they don't want to die. All life has a fear of death. All life has an instinct to live.
Znamo da ne žele umrijeti, svako živo biće ima instinkt za život.
But sometimes we think they don't want to be slaves either.
Ali ponekad mislimo da ne žele biti ni robovi.
And that when they are enslaved, we forget their rebellion is systemic, and when it erupts, stand back, it is fierce.
Ali, budući da su robovi, zaboravljamo da kada dolazi do pobune, onda je ona žestoka i mi se trebamo maknuti.
How many elephants have killed their trainers?
Koliko slonova je ubilo svoje trenere?
How many hundreds of times have elephants finally said, "Ja, basta, this is it, enough. Today is your day to die.
Koliko puta su slonovi stotinama puta rekli ne znam. Ovo je dosta, danas je tvoj dan da umreš.
Today I am the master.
Danas sam ja vladar.
The most famous case is Tyke, the elephant. You've seen this footage perhaps. It's incredibly moving.
Najpoznatiji slučaj je Tajk, možda ste vidjeli tu video snimku, vrlo dirljiva.
There was a circus elephant in Hawaii that was already known to be a bad elephant.
To je slon iz cirkusa na Havajima koji je već bio poznat po svojem navodno lošem ponašanju.
Tyke killed 2 trainers.
Tajk je ubio 2 trenera.
You know, just like this. It looked like rolling a ball.
Znači, s nogom ih je pregazio kao da gura loptu.
And they were dead.
I ubio ih je.
Tyke ran out of the building, down the streets of Hawaii.
Tajk je izašao iz cirkusa i ulicama Havaja.
Dozens of police came and do what police do.
A došle su desetine policajaca i učinile ono što policija čini.
They opened their weapons and they fired hundreds of shots at Tyke until Tyke went down and died.
Uzeli su oružje i stotinama puta prostrijelili Tajka sve dok nije pao i umro.
One of the saddest things you'll ever see, you can find it on YouTube if you so shall look.
Jedna od najtužnijih stvari koje ćete ikad vidjeti možete je pronaći na YouTube ako to želite.
How many orcas, how many giant whales have killed their trainers in aquarium settings?
Koliko je orki, kitova ubojica ubilo svoje trenere u akvarijima.
This is routine.
To je rutina.
I think it was only a couple years ago there was some very dramatic footage captured of an orca killing its trainer, submerging her underwater until she drowned. That orca knew exactly what it was doing,
Mislim
he
da
or she.
je prije samo nekoliko godina se dogodio slučaj zabilježeni kada je orka povukla svojeg trenera pod vodu sve dok se on ili ona nije utopio.
A few years ago in the San Francisco Zoo, there was a tiger that was in a pit and was considered impossible for that tiger to get out of that pit up toward the customers area, the human area.
Da, prije nekoliko godina u San Francisco je bio znači u zoološkom vrtu tigar koji se nalazi u svojoj nastambi u jami i ljudi su mislili da je nemoguće za tog tigra da skoči do prostora za gledatelje.
Well, one night 3 fools got what they deserved.
Jedne noći 3 budale su dobile ono što zaslužuju.
They were pelting the tiger with objects, with rocks, with food.
Gađali su tigra sa kamenjem, sa hranom.
Yelling at the tiger, insulting the tiger, disrespecting the tiger.
Vikali su na njega, vrijeđali ga, nisu mu pokazivali poštovanje.
That tiger did the impossible.
A taj tigar je učinio ono što je nemoguće.
That tiger jumped higher than anyone thought possible.
On je skočio više nego što je iko mogao zamisliti.
It killed each one of those bastards one by one.
Ubio je svakog od njih jednog po jednog.
It didn't touch anyone else.
I nije nikog drugog dirao.
Animals resist oppression.
Životinje se opiru tlačiteljima.
They are telling us what they think about their conditions of slavery.
Oni nam govore što misle o svojim uvjetima zatočeništva.
This is one of the ways in which we get the animal standpoint. They tell us they do not like oppression. They value freedom. They value being with their own kind in their natural setting.
Na taj način dobivamo znanje o tome što životinje žele. Njima je važna sloboda da žive život u svojem prirodnom okolišu.
But we can also go to film and literature to get the animal standpoint in some fascinating ways.
No životinjsko stajalište možemo pronaći i u filmu i u književnosti.
You remember the book Frankenstein by Mary Shelley?
Sjećate li se Frankensteina Mary Shelley?
It was written in 1818.
Napisana je 1818. godine.
It was one of the first critiques of industrial civilization.
To je bila jedna od prvih kritika industrijske civilizacije.
One could call it an eco-feminist critique of male-dominated science and technology.
Možete nazvati ekofeminističkom kritikom tehnologije, muške tehnologije.
One could say that in this novel, Mary Shelley is portraying Dr. Frankenstein as Dr. Faustus.
Možete reći da u tom romanu Mary Shelley prikazuje doktora Frankensteina kao doktora Fausta.
Of course, Dr. Faustus is the legendary character portrayed in various form, best by Goethe, as a scientist obsessed with control and order and mastery of nature.
Znači, doktor Faust je lik kojeg je najbolje opisao Goethe kao znanstvenika koji je opsjednut kontrolom nad životom, nad prirodom.
As a scientist obsessed with technique but forgot about ethics.
Znanstvenik koji je opsjednut tehnikom, ali koji je zaboravio na etiku.
As a scientist, his curiosity has no moral context.
Znanstvenik čija znatiželja nema nikakve moralnosti.
Sound familiar?
Zvuči nam to poznato.
Sometimes we call them vivisectors.
Ponekad ih zovemo vivisektorima.
The so-called creature, the monster, is something like Rousseau's natural man. Rousseau's idea of natural man.
Da, Rousseauova ideja o prirodnom čovjeku.
Natural man in Rousseau, the romantic theorist, was naturally good and corrupted only by civilization.
Taj čovjek je po prirodi bio dobar, a samo ga je pokvarila civilizacija.
Naturally good means we have intact animal instinct for sympathy and goodness and benevolence.
Prirodno dobar znači da u sebi imamo još očuvanu životinjsku sklonost ka suosjećajnošću i dobročinstvu.
We are naturally good, but society corrupts us and turns us into evil, greedy, competitive, destructive and violent people.
Po prirodi smo dobri, ali društvo od nas čini pohlepne ljude, nasilne i slične.
So, Frankenstein rebels against his creator.
Stoga Frankenstein se pobunio protiv svog stvoritelja.
Frankenstein the monster.
Frankenstein čudovište.
Ironically, the monster is more human than the human who created the monster.
Ironično, ali čudovište je više humano od čovjeka koji je stvorio to čudovište.
The monster is naturally good. It has no ill will toward anyone.
Čudovište je po prirodi dobro i nema nikakvu lošu namjeru prema
Until the monster is systematically betrayed by the human species.
Sve dok ljudska vrsta sustavno ne počinje sustavno izdaju.
And the monster begins to kill and seeks revenge against Dr. Frankenstein.
I čudovište počne ubijati i traži osvetu protiv doktora Frankensteina.
But there's an episode in the book, if you remember, it's remarkable.
No, u knjizi postoji jedna epizoda, možda je se sjećate.
He's living near, I think it's a French peasant family in a small village.
On živi tamo, neka francuska obitelj seoska.
And he learns how to read
I uči kako čitati.
by watching humans read.
Tako što promatra ljude.
You have to suspend your disbelief a bit. He learns how to read.
Dakle, morate vjerovati, uči čitati.
And he picks up a history book and he reads to his horror and utter amazement.
Uzima knjigu o povijesti i čita zaprepašten.
That the history of the human species is a history of war, bloodshed, violence, murder and genocide.
Da je povijest ljudske vrste, povijest rata, genocida, proljevanja krvi.
And this confirms his belief that the human animal is an ugly, dirty, violent animal.
I tako našao potvrdu svojeg stajališta da je ljudska životinja nasilna i prljava životinja.
This is a powerful critique of human domination, the human pathology of power from the animal's standpoint.
To je vrlo moćna kritika ljudske patologije sa životinjskog
It's
stajališta.
not clear what the monster is. The monster is not human, it's not animal, it's something else.
Nije baš jasno što je to čudovište, je li ona životinja ili čovjek, ono je nešto drugo.
But it's close enough to it's a non-human standpoint, looking at human reality.
Ali to je ipak ne ljudsko stajalište koje promatra ljudsku stvarnost.
How often do we get that?
Koliko to često vidimo?
There's another example I recommend to you, a novel by Daniel Quinn.
Predlažem vam još jedan primjer, a to je roman Daniela Quina.
This novel is called Ishmael.
Taj roman se zove Išmael.
It's in the biblical name.
A to je biblijsko ime.
Students always would come up to me and say, Dr. Best, have you read Ishmael?
Studenti mi prilaze i pitaju, Dr. Best, jeste li čitali Išmaela?
Next year, Dr. Best, have you read Ishmael?
Sljedeće godine opet isto.
No, damn it, there are a lot of books I haven't read, okay?
Ne,
Leave me
postoje
alone.
mnoge knjige koje nisam pročitao, pustite me na miru.
One day I decide, okay, I'm tired of this question. I'm going to read Ishmael.
Jednom sam se umorio od tog pitanja i rekao, pročitat ću Išmaela.
I couldn't put it down.
Nisam je mogao odložiti.
If someone had said to me, Dr. Best, have you read Ishmael? Because it is a Socratic dialogue between a gorilla and a man about the inherent flaws of the human species, I might have read it much sooner.
Da mi je neko rekao da li sam pročitao Išmaela, zato je to sokratovski dijalog između gorile i čovjeka o manama ljudskog karaktera, možda bi to prije pročitao.
So very quickly what happens in Ishmael, a man reads an ad in the paper looking for a tenant, I forget what, but looking to sell something, buy something, and he ends up into a room and he hears a voice and the voice calls him over, he comes over and there's a gorilla there.
U kratko radnje Išmaela, jedan čovjek pregledava oglase, traži neke predmete i dolazi u sobu, jedan stan i u toj sobi ga dočeka gorila.
And after he finally gets over his disbelief and does recognize that a gorilla is speaking to him telepathically in human language, in very complex form, he begins to listen.
Nakon što napokon prihvati da gorila priča njemu na telepatski način, ljudskim jezikom, onda počne slušati.
And the gorilla interrogates him like Socrates would interrogate a student.
A gorila ga ispituje onako kako je Sokrat ispitivao svoje učenike.
The gorilla is a captive in a zoo.
Gorila je zatočenik u zoološkom vrtu.
And the gorilla says, let me tell you something, you are the one who is captive.
Gorila mu kaže, ti si taj koji je zatočenik.
You are captive to a worldview.
Ti si rob jednog svjetonazora.
The worldview of the dominator culture.
Svjetonazora kulture dominacije.
You are alienated from the world that gave birth to you.
Otuđen si od svijeta koji te je rodio.
You have no idea how to live in harmony with this world.
Nemaš pojma kako živjeti u skladu s ovim svijetom.
There are two types of civilization, the givers and the takers.
Postoje dvije vrste civilizacija, davatelji i uzimatelji.
The givers would be like hunting gathering tribes that only took what they could consume and always left an ecological space intact or moved on so that space could heal.
Davatelji su poput društava lovaca skupljača koji su uzimali toliko da ostave ravnotežu i koji su napustili određeno područje kako bi to područje moglo ozdraviti.
But takers take more than the earth can sustain.
Ali uzimatelji uzimaju više nego što zemlja može dati.
Takers take without giving back.
Oni uzimaju bez davanja natrag.
Takers take and they steal and they rob until everything is gone.
Uzimatelji uzimaju, kradu i ubijaju sve dok sve nestane.
And so Ishmael is this incredible critique of agricultural society, really, from the perspective of a gorilla.
Išmael je nevjerojatno dobra kritika poljoprivrednog društva iz perspektive gorile.
So of course it's not really an animal talking, but it's from the animal standpoint.
Nije to znači doslovno životinja koja priča, ali je sa stajališta životinja.
And we can look at ourselves as a species in a way that we cannot if another human is making the same critique.
I možemo na sebe tako gledati kao na vrstu, kako ne možemo gledati kada bi neki drugi čovjek o nama tako pričao.
And I'll give you one more example, then I'll talk about how the animal standpoint applies to tactics.
Daću vam jedan primjer, onda ću govoriti kako životinjsko stajalište se može primijeniti na taktiku.
Do you know what the longest running critique of speciesism is in culture?
Znate li koja je najstarija kritika specizma u kulturi?
It's a film series that's been continuing film after film for over 50 years.
To je filmski serijal koji se nastavlja film iza filma već 50 godina.
Any idea what it might be?
Imate ideju što bi to moglo biti?
Planet of the Apes.
Planet majmuna.
Planet of the Apes, there's like 8 episodes of this. And in each episode, well, in the first episode, we see that humans have destroyed the earth, and only a few exist, and apes have evolved to assume command of the earth.
Znači, planet majmuna se sastoji od 8 epizoda. U prvoj su ljudi uništili zemlju i majmuni su se uzdigli i sada su vladari zemlje.
And humans become slaves of the apes.
A ljudi su postali robovi majmuna.
Now, they just made a new Planet of the Apes film. You have to see it.
Upravo su napravili novi film Planet majmuna i morate ga pogledati.
I have not seen a stronger critique of the human animal in any other form.
Nisam još vidio bolju kritiku ljudske životinje.
I have not seen a stronger pro-animal liberation film ever.
Nisam nikada vidio bolji film u korist oslobođenja životinja.
Now let me talk about, and so I think that's a powerful example of the animal standpoint and critique of human civilization.
Mislim da je to vrlo zanimljiv primjer životinjskog stajališta i kritike ljudskog društva.
I want to talk about now tactics. The animal standpoint can dramatically change the tactics that we use in this movement.
Sada bih govorio o taktici. Životinjsko stajalište može dramatično promijeniti taktike koje koristimo u ovom pokretu.
And some of you might find this very controversial.
Nekima će možda ovo biti vrlo kontroverzna tema.
I don't mean to offend you.
Ne želim vas uvrijediti,
but deal with it.
ali nosite se s tim.
When we consider tactics, typically this movement is very pacifistic.
Kada razmišljamo o taktici, tipično dolazimo do zaključka da je ovaj pokret vrlo pacifističan.
And we always say things like violence is wrong, violence is never right. An eye for an eye makes the world blind. Violence only creates more violence. We say these cliches all the time.
Znači, stalno govorimo te kliše, nasilje nije dobro, oko za oko svi ćemo oslijepiti i slično.
But these cliches are not true.
Međutim, ti klišeji nisu istiniti.
Because when you study the history of modern social movements, you see that violence has always been a driving force of progressive change.
Ako promatrate povijest modernih društvenih pokreta, vidjet ćete da je nasilje uvijek bio element promjene i napretka.
Gandhi didn't win Indian independence all by himself. There was an armed uprising behind him that was never covered, but put strong pressure on the British to leave.
Gandhi nikad nije pobjedio britanski kolonijalizam sam, iza njega je bio veliki otpor naoružani koji je izvršio, znači, pritisak, ali o kojem nitko ne govori.
Martin Luther King did not accomplish anything without being positioned as a moderate, thanks to the help of Malcolm X and the Black Panthers.
Martin Luther King ne bi ništa promijenio da ga nisu pokazali kao umjerenu osobu u odnosu na Malcolm X-a i Crne pantere.
And similarly, the U.S. did not pull out of Vietnam because of the hippie protesters in the streets of America.
Isto tako, SAD se nije povukao iz Vijetnama zbog hippie prosvjeda.
They were defeated militarily in the battlefield by the Viet Cong.
Doživjeli su vojni poraz na bojištu od Viet Conga.
So if we get over the hang-up that pacifism is the only way to work our tactics, and we get over the peer pressure and the dogma that violence is always wrong,
ako prevladamo, znači, uvjerenje da je i tu dogmu da je nasilje uvijek loše,
and we ask the question, what should we do from the animal standpoint, we might get a different answer of what are effective and legitimate tactics.
I postavimo pitanje sa životinjskog stajališta, možda bismo dobili odgovor o učinkovitoj taktici.
With the laboratory animal that is being cut apart and poisoned wants you to stand outside with a sign, write a petition on Facebook, or break down the damn door. Smash through the cage and bring it out of there to a safe place.
Bili laboratorijska životinja koju režu i koju truju stajala ispred laboratorija sa natpisima ili pokrenula peticiju na Facebooku, ili bi pak provalila u laboratoriji i razbila kaveze i izvadila druge životinje van.
I want to read you a quote by a writer named Derek Jensen.
Pročitao bi vam citat pisca Dereka Jensena.
He asked the question in terms of what should we do when dams are being built and salmon fish are dying.
Pitao je što bismo trebali učiniti po pitanju gradnje brana zbog kojeg umiru lososi.
Because most people would write a letter to their congressperson and send a check to Greenpeace and consider their moral responsibility absolved.
Većina ljudi šalje pismo svojem predstavniku u kongresu i određenu donaciju Greenpeaceu i time misle da su obavili svoju dužnost.
Derek Jensen says this, and I'll read you just a short passage.
Jensen kaže ovo, pročitat ću vam kratak odlomak.
He said, what becomes the most moral thing to do?
Što je najmoralnija stvar?
Do we stand by and watch the last of the salmon die?
Hoćemo li stati i promatrati i posljednjeg lososa kako umire?
Do we write letters and file lawsuits
Hoćemo li pisati pisma i podizati parnice
that we know in our hearts will not make a damn difference?
koje duboko u sebi znamo da neće ništa postići?
Or do we take the dam down itself?
Ili ćemo srušiti samu branu?
Do we take the dam down ourselves?
Hoćemo li sami srušiti
In
branu?
other words, he's suggesting it is legitimate and necessary to blow up a dam to save the fish.
Drugim riječima on kaže da je opravdano srušiti branu kako bi se spasile ribe.
This is clearly illegal.
To je očito ilegalno.
For some people, it's unethical.
Za neke ljude to je neetično.
But for those of you who consider this an unethical action, whose side are you on?
Ali za vas koji mislite da je to neetično, na čijoj ste vi strani?
John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club in the United States in the 19th century,
John Muir, osnivač Sierra kluba u 19. stoljeću,
said the following:
je rekao sljedeće.
if there were a war between the bears and the humans, I'd take the side of the bears.
Da postoji rat između medvjeda i ljudi, ja bih stao na stranu medvjeda.
Whose side would you take?
Čiju ćete vi stranu izabrati?
I know what side I'd fight on.
Ja znam za koga bi se ja borio.
You might say, well, do we need to fight at all?
A možda ćete reći, moramo li se uopće boriti?
I'd say yes.
Ja bih rekao da.
Because the corporate state system of exploitation is a gigantic system of slavery that is profitable and will never be relinquished peacefully.
Zato korporativni sustav iskorištavanja, sustav koji stvara profit i kojeg nikad nećemo legalno
It will
iskoristiti.
never come down from petitions or demonstrations or protests or letters to Congress people.
Nikada neće nestati zbog peticija ili prosvjeda ili pisama predstavnicima u Saboru i Kongresu.
This shit will stop when there is a civil war in this world like there was in the United States in the 19th century to stop human slavery.
To će prestati kada dođe do građanskog rata kakav je i postojao i u SAD-u u svrhu sprječavanja ljudskog ropstva.
It took a war to stop that.
Za to je trebao rat.
It's going to take a war to stop this.
I za ovo će trebati rat.
And let me tell you something, if you think I'm exaggerating.
Ako mislite da pretjeravam,
If you think the battle hasn't already reached the level of armed struggle.
ako mislite da je borba već došla do toga da se bore sa oružjem,
What is happening in Africa? What is happening in Australia?
što se događa u Africi i Australiji?
Poachers are killing rhinoceri,
Krivolovci
And
ubijaju
elephants.
nosoroge i slonove.
These poachers are, in some case, mafia funded.
Te krivolovce ponekad financira mafija.
They are high tech.
Imaju vrlo oboruženi su.
They descend onto private farms in helicopters
Dolaze na privatne farme s helikopterima
with wireless electronic technology
sa bežičnom tehnologijom
and automatic weapons.
i automatskim oružjem.
And they're there for one purpose and one purpose only:
I tamo su zbog samo jednog razloga,
to kill
da ubiju.
and to take the horns of the elephant or the horns of the rhinoceros and leave the bloody stump behind.
I da uzmu kljove slona ili nosoroga i da napuste to područje.
And so some countries, some nations, some parts of Africa and Australia have said, "Ya basta, enough of this."
Neke države u Africi i Australija su rekli nećemo više to podnositi.
We cannot stop this peacefully.
To ne možemo spriječiti mirnim putem.
These are highly organized, highly trained gangs of murderers.
Ovo su vrlo organizirane bande ubojica.
And so they have organized armies and militias with weapons and legal permission to shoot on sight to protect elephants and rhinoceros.
Toga su te države organizirale policijske i vojne snage da ubiju te krivolovce na mjestu.
And I have collected a small volume of newspaper articles that describe this war in detail.
Ja sam skupio mnogo članaka koji opisuju detaljno taj rat.
And I could show you bodies of dead poachers.
Mogao bi vam pokazati tijela mrtvih krivolovaca.
I could show you bodies of dead militia that are hired to defend the animals.
Znači, mogu vam pokazati tijela mrtvih vojnika i policajaca koji su najmjeni da brane životinje.
But this is an armed struggle.
No, to je oružana borba.
And so what would the animals want us to do?
Što bi životinje htjele da učinimo?
From the animal standpoint, is pacifism the correct strategy?
Sa životinjskog stajališta je li pacifizam ispravna strategija?
To stop the Holocaust, do we write petitions and write letters, Dear Adolf, as Gandhi suggested?
A da bismo zaustavili holokaust, bismo li trebali pisati Hitleru, dragi Adolfe, kao što je to Gandhi predlagao?
Sometimes there are forces on this planet that are so strong, so evil, so implacable, there's only one way to resist.
Ponekad na ovom planetu postoje toliko snažne sile da postoji samo jedan način otpora.
And it's not violence, by the way.
I to nije nasilje usput.
It's self-defense.
To je samo obrana.
Now, Paul Watson, you may know the leader of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society.
Možda znate Paul Watsona, vođe Sea Shepherda.
Got me to think about the animal standpoint in a different way. Really, it's a variation of the human standpoint.
Zbog njega sam počeo o životnom stajalištu razmišljati na drugi način koji je varijacija ljudskog stajališta.
What I call the future generation standpoint.
To ja zovem stajalište budućih naraštaja.
The people who live at the end of this century are doomed.
Ljudi koji će živjeti na kraju ovog stoljeća, oni su osuđeni na propast.
The conditions on this planet will be like fists of fury.
Uvjeti na ovom planetu će biti pakani.
By 2050, there will be 9 billion people on the planet.
Do 2050. godine na planetu će biti 9 milijardi ljudi.
The oceans will be dead and without fish.
Oceani će biti mrtvi i bez ribe.
The meat consumption of China, the world's most populous nation, will have doubled.
Potrošnja mesa u Kini će se udvostručiti.
Some scientists project within 100 years our species will be gone.
Neki znanstvenici predviđaju da će za 100 godina naša vrsta izumrijeti.
It may take longer, but clearly we're on an unsustainable path.
Možda će trebati duže, ali očito ovaj način nije održiv.
Now, instead of asking what would the animals want us to do to stop a situation of incredible violence that can only be likened to a Holocaust,
umjesto da pitamo što bi životinje htjeli da učinimo da spriječimo situaciju koja se može usporediti sa holokaustom,
let us ask what would the future want us to do right now so that there is a future.
Upitajmo se što bi budući naraštaji htjeli da upravo sada učinimo kako bi bilo u budućnosti.
The actions that some people consider extreme would be considered conservative by the future.
Buduće naraštaji bi neka djela koja danas neki ljudi smatraju ekstremnima smatrali vrlo konzervativnim.
Future generations would want us to salvage this planet by any means necessary.
Budući naraštaji bi željeli da pod svaku cijenu spasimo ovaj planet.
They want water, they want land, they want animals, they want a clean earth to live on. They have every right. We have a duty for future generations not to be takers but to be givers.
Oni žele zemlju, oni žele vodu, oni žele životinje. Mi imamo dužnost prema budućim naraštajima da budemo davatelji, a ne uzimatelji.
So if we looked at things from their perspective, what we consider extreme would be at best moderate.
kada bismo gledali s njihovog stajališta, ono što mi smatramo ekstremnim bi bilo u najboljem slučaju konzervativno.
We wouldn't listen to the pacifists, we wouldn't listen to dogma, we'd pay no attention to what the media.
Ne bismo slušali pacifiste, dogme, ono što nam govore mediji.
We wouldn't give a damn what the laws are.
Ne bi nas bilo briga za zakon.
We just would do what it takes to save this planet.
Samo bi činili ono što je potrebno da spasimo planet.
Because we are the crucial generations.
Jer mi smo presudna naraštaj.
There's a book by an American newscaster named Tom Brokaw.
Postoji knjiga američkog novinara Toma Brokawa.
It's called The Greatest Generation Ever.
Zove se najveći naraštaj ikada.
These were the young men and women that fought World War II against German Nazis.
To su bili mladi ljudi, žene i muškarci koji su se u Drugom svjetskom ratu borili protiv nacista.
These are the people who fought against the Japanese.
Ti su se ljudi borili protiv Japanaca.
These are people who made incredible sacrifices, suffered horribly, and of course, countless thousands died.
Oni su se žrtvovali, stravično patili i bezbrojne tisuće su umrle.
Well, we have a much greater threat on this planet than we ever had with German Nazis.
A mi smo suočeni s puno većom prijetnjom nego što su to bili njemački nacisti.
It's not located to any particular part of Europe.
Nije locirana u bilo kojem dijelu Europe.
It is global in scope.
Ona je globalna.
It is a much stronger force.
I mnogo jača sila.
It's much deadlier.
I mnogo smrtonosnija.
I don't know how to describe it except by a few terms.
Ne znam kako je opisati osim pomoću nekoliko pojmova.
Multinational capital.
Multinacionalni kapital.
Neoliberalism.
Neoliberalizam.
The industrial military complex.
Spoj industrije i vojske.
Human overpopulation.
Prekobrojnost stanovništva.
Overconsumption.
Prekomjerna potrošnja.
Speciesism.
Specizam.
That is the great war that we are facing now. We have the greatest responsibilities of any generation. We are potentially the greatest generations.
To je veliki rat. Mi imamo od svih naraštaja najveću odgovornost. Mi smo potencijalno najveći naraštaj.
And that's if you believe with me, and if you read the science, that this world is in serious crisis right now.
To ako vjerujete meni i ako čitate znači znanstvene članke koji govore da je svijet danas u velikoj nevolji.
We're in an unprecedented time in our history.
Tako nešto se nikad nije u povijesti dogodilo.
This is the era of climate change.
To je era klimatskih promjena.
The skeptics are bought off by ExxonMobil.
Skeptike potplaćuje ExxonMobil.
The skeptics are idiots.
Skeptici su idioti.
There is no good argument against the reality of human-caused global warming and climate change.
Ne postoji nikakav protuargument protiv tvrdnje da su klimatske promjene uzrokovane ljudskom djelatnošću.
I believe I mentioned the year 2050.
Vjerujem da sam spomenuo godinu 2050.
2050 is also the year the scientists are saying the ice caps will all be melted.
To je godina kada znanstvenici kažu da će sve polarne kape se već otopiti.
No Arctic ice.
Bez arktičkog leda.
This is the time of the 6 great species extinction crisis.
A to je vrijeme krize 6. velikog izumiranja vrsta.
In the history of the planet.
U povijesti planeta.
That means there have been 5 before this one.
To znači da je bilo 5 prije ove.
This one's happening now.
Ova se događa sada.
Before our eyes.
Pred našim očima.
We're watching the great apes, the tigers, the lions, and all kinds of magnificent species and plants and all kinds of species we don't even know about die before our eyes.
Promatramo majmune, tigrove, lavove, biljke i sićušne vrste o kojima čak ne znamo ništa kako umiru pred našim očima.
The last species extinction crisis, do you know when that was?
Znate li kada je bila posljednja veliko izumiranje vrsta?
Just a little time ago.
Prije nedavno.
65 million years ago.
Prije 65 milijuna godina.
When a meteor crashed into the earth and destroyed all of the dinosaurs and 50% of all species.
Kada je meteorit udario u zemlju i uništio sve dinosaure i 50% životinskih vrsta.
65 million years ago.
Prije 65 milijuna godina.
Now we are the meteor
Sad smo mi
crashing.
taj meteorit.
But the meteor only crashed once and the earth had a chance to stabilize.
Ali on je udario samo jednom i zemlja imala priliku stabilizirati se.
And when the earth has a chance to stabilize, it does what it does.
Kada ona ima tu priliku, ona čini to što čini.
It creates life.
Ona stvara život.
Darwin called it speciation.
Darwin je to nazvao specijacijom.
The creation of species, the diversification of biodiversity.
Stvaranje vrsta i biološke raznolikosti.
That's what the planet does.
To čini planet.
We have stopped this.
Mi smo to zaustavili.
Evolution has come to an end.
Evolucija je završila.
And we are now in a devolutionary process. We are simplifying life, not complexifying
Sada
life.
se razvija proces devolucije, mi stvaramo jednostavniji život.
So we keep crashing and crashing and crashing into the earth, and the earth has no chance to recover.
I stoga neprestano udaramo zemlju i ona nema priliku oporaviti se.
And so I say we have a choice.
Stoga kažem da imamo izbor.
We either learn how to live in harmony with the life forms and the earth on this planet,
Ili ćemo naučiti živjeti u skladu sa životnim oblicima i životom na ovom planetu,
or we die.
ili ćemo umrijeti.
And if we can't learn how to live in harmony with the planet,
Ako ne možemo naučiti kako živjeti u skladu sa planetom,
then we deserve to die.
onda zaslužujemo umrijeti.
And I don't shed a tear anymore for our species.
I neću pustiti suzu za našu vrstu.
At one time this made me sad.
A jednom me to žalostilo.
Now I have a different kind of hope.
Sada imam jednu posve drugu nadu.
I have a different reason to fight.
Imam drugi razlog za borbu.
My hope is that if we don't make it, that we get off this planet as soon as possible.
Nadam se, ako mi ne uspijemo preživjeti, da ćemo što prije otići s ovog
And as
planeta.
soon as we do, the forest will regenerate, the waters will become pure, the air will blow normal once more.
I da čim mi nestanemo, da će se šume obnoviti, da će rijeke se čistiti kao i zrak.
Every species has its place on the planet. The smallest, most humblest species are the most important ones.
Svaka vrsta ima svoje mjesto na planetu, a one najmanje su najvažnije.
The butterfly, the earthworm, and the African dung beetle that cleans the waste products of animals, moves them throughout the forest to create forests.
Znači to su leptir, crvi i skarabej, ne znam kako se koji vuče taj izmet i stvara šume.
These humble animals play a vital role on this planet.
Te životinje igraju presudnu ulogu na ovom planetu.
There's one species you could pull off this planet that the planet would improve.
Samo jednu možete vrstu maknuti s ovog planeta, nakon čega bi se planet oporavio.
And we know what species that is.
I mi znamo koja je to vrsta.
If we were to die, the earth would begin to heal.
Kada bismo mi umrli, zemlja bi počela se oporavljati.
And if this strikes you as misanthropic or something evil to say,
ako vas to čini kao da sam mizantrop ili da govorim zle stvari,
understand I'm not wishing this or bringing it about.
Shvatite da ja to ne želim, niti ću to ostvariti.
You have to ask yourself the question, what makes us so important that we should stay so that the rest of the earth could die?
Morate se upitati zbog čega smo mi toliko važni da trebamo ostati ovdje i pustiti da ostatak zemlje umre.
So how about I end with my own thought experiment? Would you like to hear this?
Evo, završit ću s jednim malim pokusom, biste li ga htjeli čuti?
I'm not going to give you the answer.
Neću vam dati odgovor.
You have to decide for yourself.
Morate sami odlučiti.
But what you decide will clarify your values, and this will clarify your values in a very dramatic way.
Ali ono što ćete odlučiti, to će vam pojasniti mnoge stvari i vaše vrijednosti.
I hold in my hand here enough of the substance that I need to accomplish a goal.
U ruci držim dovoljno tvari koja mi je potrebna da ostvarim cilj.
This is a water that will sterilize the entire human population.
Ovo je voda koja
All I have to do is dump it in any local water supply. It will go global and sterilize everyone.
ovu vodu kada bi bacio bilo koji odvod, ona bi otišla u čitav svijet i sterilizirala sve ljude.
No one will feel pain.
Nitko ne bi osjetio bol.
No one will know what happened.
Nitko ne bi znao što se dogodilo.
Nor will anyone ever again breed.
Niti bi se ikad više razmnožavao.
So the next baby generation that is born will be the last.
Stoga sljedeća generacija beba koja bi bila rođena bila i posljednja.
And we will die. And it will be like that science fiction movie of 3 people on the street. The whole city is empty. Hello!
I svi mi bismo umrli i bio je poput onim filmovima znanstvene fantastike gdje je samo 3 ljudi u gradu.
And then they will die.
I onda bi oni umrli.
And that's the end of us.
I to je kraj naše vrste.
Now again, if we die, the planet will heal. We know this for a fact.
Dakle, ako mi umremo, planet će se iscijeliti.
And if we live and we live in the way we live now, all biodiversity will crash, and this planet, it may look like Mars someday. It may become literally dead, devoid of life.
Ako ćemo živjeti ovako kako danas živimo, nestaće sve biološke raznolikosti i jednog dana bi mogao izgledati poput Marsa.
So this is a question for you.
Ovo je pitanje za vas.
What would you do?
Što biste učinili?
If you could pour this in the water,
kad biste ovo mogli baciti u vodu
and sterilize the human
i
species,
sterilizirati ljudsku vrstu,
would you do it?
biste li to učinili?
If you did it,
Kada biste to učinili,
you'd kill more people than Hitler could imagine on his best day.
ubili biste više ljudi nego što bi to Hitler učinio na svoj najučinkovitiji dan.
If you didn't do it,
Kada to ne biste učinili,
you would assume that this failed species that we seem to be is more important than everything else on this planet.
pretpostavili biste da je ova propala vrsta najbolja na ovom planetu.
If you didn't do it, you would assume that there is still some hope we can learn and change this world to live in harmony with it.
Kada ne biste to učinili, vjerovali biste da postoji još neka nada u promjenu da možemo živjeti u skladu s ovim svijetom.
Now maybe you still have that hope.
Možda još imate tu nadu.
I'm starting to lose mine.
Ja počinjem gubiti svoju.
Thank you.
Hvala vam.
What is your opinion on welfare organizations such as PETA or the HSUS and their actions like Meatless Mondays and promoting vegetarianism, but claiming to promote animal rights and to abolish species, although they promote vegetarianism which kills animals?
Što mislite o welfarističkim udrugama poput HSUS-a ili PETE koji tvrde da su za prava životinja, ali zapravo promoviraju vegetarijanstvo, bezmesne dane, slično takve
Welfarističke.
There are different types of welfare groups.
Postoje različite skupine welfarističkih grupa.
And some are absolutely deplorable in their approaches and tactics.
Neke su apsolutno jadne po tom pitanju, njihove taktike.
And the larger they are, the more deplorable they become.
Što su veće, to su jadnije.
But just to be clear, what we mean by welfare is the regulation, not the abolition of the system of domination.
Kad govorimo o welfareu, govorimo o regulaciji tog potlačivanja, a ne o ukidanju.
We're trying to minimize the suffering rather than abolish the whole machinery of killing.
O pokušaju smanjivanja patnje umjesto ukidanja i uklanjanja čitave mašinerije ubijanja.
I think I understand the philosophy behind this. It is trying to be pragmatic and realistic. We can only do so much, we can only accomplish so little, and we should reduce the suffering that we can now. In factory farming, it's so huge a problem we can't stop it, let's try to reduce it.
Shvaćam filozofiju iza toga i pragmatizam, znači to je toliki, neki problemi su stvarno ogromni poput industrijskih farmi, ako ne možemo to zaustaviti odmah, idemo to probati nekako smanjiti i regulirati.
So just so everyone understands, there's a rationale to this that has some sense to it.
Znači tu postoji neki razum vezi toga.
But imagine you look at again the United States culture in the 19th century, the abolitionist movement.
Ako pogledate društvo 19. stoljeća u SAD-u i pokret abolicionizma,
The abolition of slavery.
abolicija, to jest ukidanje ropstva,
This emerged in 1830 and lasted until 1865, the end of the American Civil War.
taj pokret se pojavio 1830. i trajao do 1865.
Slavery-
američkog građanskog
Slavery
rata,
was abolished.
kada je ropstvo ukinuto.
The demands of the abolitionists were not for longer chains.
Znači zahtjevi abolicionista oni nisu zahtijevali duže lance,
They were not for better meals and for less beatings.
nisu zahtijevali bolju hranu i
They were
manje
for the immediate and total end of slavery.
zahtijevali su potpuno ukidanje ropstva
There was no compromise.
i nije bilo kompromisa.
And the abolitionists were a very diverse group of people that used very diverse tactics.
Abolicionisti su bili vrlo različiti ljudi i koristili su vrlo različite taktike.
They included Nat Turner and John Brown,
Među njima su bili Nat Turner i John Brown,
who led armed struggle against white slave owners.
koji su vodili oružani otpor protiv bijelih robovlasnika.
They included Harriet Tubman,
Harriet Tubman
who led the Underground Railroad.
je vodila podzemnu željeznicu.
Not literally a railroad,
Nije to doista bila željeznica,
but breaking the law
nego kršenje zakona
to take slaves out of the South,
kojim se uzimalo robove sa juga,
because the slaves were the slave owner's property,
jer su robovi bili vlasništvo robovlasnika,
protected by the Constitution.
što je štitio Ustav.
And she took the slaves from home to home, up into the north and into Canada in some cases.
Ona je vodila robove od doma do doma i sve na sjever, ponekad i do Kanade.
And that was the Underground Railroad.
To je bila podzemna željeznica.
That sounds like the Animal Liberation Front, doesn't it?
To zvuči kao pokret za oslobođenje
So the
života.
Animal Liberation Front has its roots in the Underground Railroad.
Animal Liberation Front ima svoje podrijetlo, znači u podzemnoj željeznici.
So we can see an example of an emancipation movement that knew the challenge would be hard, but did not compromise and would not yield to legitimating the system of exploitation by trying to regulate it instead of completely abolish it.
Stoga imamo primjer pokreta za emancipaciju koji je znao da će stvari biti teške, da će borba biti teška, ali nije htio podržati taj sustav i dati mu neki legitimitet tako što će ga pokušati regulirati, nego je htio da ga poslije ukine.
And they fought by any means necessary.
I oni su se borili svim sredstvima.
And they never collaborated with the oppressor.
I nikada nisu surađivali s tlačiteljima.
So when we talk about welfare policies today,
Kad danas pričamo o welfarističkoj
we
politici,
mean, for instance, cat and dog rescue groups.
pričamo o grupama za spašavanje pasa i mačaka.
Cat and dog rescue groups do more than certain abolitionists do for animals.
Te skupine čine više za životinje nego neke abolicionističke
You may
skupine.
have heard my views on Francione.
Možda ste čuli o mojim stavovima o Francioniju.
To be a Francione abolitionist means do nothing.
Biti Francione abolicionist znači ne činiti ništa.
So, if you look at the policies of the Humane Society of the United States and PETA,
Ako pogledate politiku HSUS-a i PETA,
the two largest groups, animal advocacy groups in the world,
dvije najveće skupine za dobrobit životinja na svijetu,
I find these incredibly problematic.
meni su one vrlo
And I think it's a
problematične.
setback for the animals.
Mislim da je to jedan problem za životinje, nevolja.
Because HSUS is leading the way to promote a campaign for humane meat.
Jer HSUS vodi kampanju za humano meso.
It's obscene enough we have this concept of humane killing,
Dovoljno je nevjerojatno da imamo taj pojam humanog ubijanja,
which is what PETA promotes.
što je ono što PETA promovira.
PETA does not promote humane meat, they promote humane killing.
Ona promovira humano ubijanje.
Do we have a concept, anybody, a humane rape?
Da li neko zna za ideju o humanom silovanju,
Humane child pedophilia?
humanoj pedofiliji?
Not only have the concept, but have child protection agencies make sure the child is being raped in a humane way?
Ne samo da imamo tu ideju, nego da imamo i udruge i ustanove za zaštitu djece koje osiguravaju da se djeca siluju na human način.
Have feminist groups make sure the wife is being beaten humanely by the husband?
Imamo li feminističke grupe koje zagovaraju da muškarci, da muž humano tuče svoju ženu.
And this is what we have with the Humane Society and PETA. They are collaborating with the industries to promote humane killing or humane slaughter.
I to je u slučaju HSUS-a i PETA, oni surađuju sa industrijom zlostavljača kako bi imali humano ubijanje i humano klanje.
I get the thinking, but it's wrong.
Ja shvaćam to razmišljanje, ali ono je pogrešno.
Because what is happening now is people say, oh, humane meat. Now I can eat meat again.
Danas se događa da ljudi misle, imamo
The Humane Society said it's humane.
sad mogu opet jesti meso jer je humano društvo reklo da mogu da je to
And
humano.
they're working with Whole Foods, the largest natural foods retailer in the United States. They're credible.
I oni surađuju s Whole Foodsom, najvećim proizvođačem hrane u
Thank
SAD-u.
God I don't have to eat vegetables only anymore.
Hvala Bogu da više ne moram jesti samo povrće.
And these are the people who are vegetarian or vegan at great pains to be so.
I to su ljudi vegetarijanci ili vegani kojima je to strašno teško.
So now what we have is more suffering, more killing.
I zato danas imamo više patnji, više ubojstava.
What we have are industries that promote the reputation of the slaughterhouses and factory farms.
Imamo znači neke udruge koje promiču ugled određenih klaonica i farmi.
We have animal advocacy groups telling them if you kill humanely, you'll make higher profits.
Imamo skupine za zaštitu životinja koje njima govore ako ubijate humano imat ćete veći profit.
I thought they were our enemy.
A ja sam mislio da su oni naši neprijatelji.
Yeah, we're collaborating with them.
A mi surađujemo s njima.
We're signing contracts with them.
Potpisujemo ugovore s njima.
And who's benefiting?
I ko tu ima koristi?
The industries are benefiting.
Industrija ima koristi.
HSUS and PETA are benefiting.
HSUS i PETA imaju koristi.
The animals are losing.
Životinje gube.
I recognized this dramatically one day the day I became abolitionist.
To sam shvatio jednog dana kad sam postao abolicionist.
Sounds like a good newspaper story, right?
Zvuči kao dobra priča za novine.
I was working on a PETA campaign. I didn't really have my thoughts very clear. I wanted to work, for everyone, please everyone, do everything.
Radio sam na kampanji za PETA, nisam puno razmišljao, htio sam učiniti sve za sve.
And we were at a stoplight at a busy street handing out leaflets to people.
Bili smo na semaforu na ulici i dijelili smo letke ljudima.
In front of Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Ispred restorana Kentucky Fried Chicken.
And the leaflets were from PETA asking the industries to not slice the chicken's throats as they go down the machine.
I na lecima je pisalo da molba KFC-u da ne režu vratove pilićima dok idu tom pokretnom vrpcom,
But rather to gas them.
nego radi da ih ubiju plinom.
The nice way like the Nazis did.
Znate onaj lijepi način kao što su to učinili nacisti?
So as I was doing this, I realized I am asking people to support a campaign for the humane killing of chickens when I should be handing out vegan literature.
Tako sam shvatio da ja dajem letke kojima tražim ljude da podupru humano ubijanje životinja, treba bi tražiti veganstvo.
Although we overestimate what we accomplish through vegans, frankly, veganism is an abolitionist campaign.
Veganstvo je abolicionistička kampanja, iako ponekad možda precijenjujemo to što postižemo kao vegani.
I don't believe in that kind of advocacy. I think it sets us back, not moves us forward.
Stoga ja ne vjerujem u takvu vrstu zagovaranja i mislim da je to više neka prepreka nego napredak.
You asked about Meatless Mondays and other kinds of campaigns. Well, you can do Meatless Monday campaign without being a gigantic organization.
Znači u vezi tih bezvesnih dana možete raditi takvu kampanju i ako niste ogromna
You
organizacija.
can do it without being a collaborator.
Možete to učiniti i ne morate biti kolaboracionist.
And I understand the reasoning behind it.
I shvaćam razlog za to.
And I don't know what the right answer is sometimes.
I ponekad ne znam koji je pravi odgovor.
So you're saying, look, 1 day a week, give up meat, and you'll see you can do it. And then maybe you can do it 6 days a week, 7.
I kažete, pustite meso jedan dan u tjednu i onda, ako možete, pustite i svih 7 dana u tjednu.
But it's not exactly principled, it's not exactly abolitionist, is it?
No to nije baš onako principijalno, to nije u stilu abolicionista.
So you could say in the abolitionist movement, beating free Monday.
U abolicionističkom pokretu biste mogli reći ponedjeljak bez tuče žene.
We won't beat you on Monday, but Tuesday, watch out.
Nećemo te tući u ponedjeljak, ali utorak se pazi.
So I understand these campaigns. I think they're well intentioned.
Shvaćam te kampanje, mislim da imaju dobru namjeru.
The problem is so big, I guess you have to start somewhere.
Problem je toliko velik, vjerujem da morate negdje ipak početi.
But of course people will ask, shouldn't we advocate veganism 7 days a week?
Ali naravno, ljudi će postaviti pitanje, ne bismo li trebali zagovarati veganstvo 7 dana u tjednu.
And that makes sense, doesn't it?
I to ima smisla, zar ne?
But also to look at from the other side, are people might not even take the first step.
Ali možemo gledati s druge strane, ljudi možda neće ni prvi korak napraviti.
Personally, I would do a full-fledged abolitionist campaign.
Osobno bi napravio punokrvnu abolicionističku kampanju.
But I think I can find better things to do than criticize Meatless Mondays.
Mislim da mogu bolje stvari raditi osim kritiziranja bezvesnih dana.
So these are really complicated tactical questions in the movement. But I know, forget about Meatless Monday, what HSUS is doing, what PETA is doing for the animals is absolute collaborationist tactics.
To su komplicirana pitanja, ali ono što sam siguran, ono što PETA rade i HSUS, oni su kolaboracionisti.
Have you noticed there is no real opposition or resistance in the world today?
Jeste li primijetili danas ne postoji nikakvog pravog otpora?
Or very little.
Je vrlo malo otpora u svijetu.
In 1950s, the German theorist, critical theory, the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse,
1950-ih Herbert Marcuse
wrote a book called One-Dimensional Society.
je napisao knjigu Jednodimenzionalno društvo.
And in this book he described a society with no opposition.
U toj knjizi je opisao društvo bez ikakvog otpora.
The power of corporations was complete.
Moć korporacije je bila potpuna.
There was mass conformity everywhere.
Postojao je masovni konformizam.
And no significant forces of opposition or resistance to the power structures.
I nikakvog pravog otpora strukturama moći.
And that's what we see in the environmental movement and in the animal advocacy movement.
I to danas postoji u ekološkom pokretu i
We
pokretu
see
za prava životinja.
the biggest groups are working for the exploiters.
Najveće skupine rade za izrabljivače.
Greenpeace is a bullshit group that doesn't deserve one penny.
Greenpeace je glupa grupa koja ne zaslužuje nikakav novac.
And the same for HSUS and PETA.
Isto vrijedi za HSUS i PETA.
PETA at least promotes veganism and used to, I think, maybe still supports the ALF.
PETA barem promovira veganstvo i bar mislim da još uvijek zagovara ALF.
So I always have cut them some slack.
Uvijek sam imao onako
But
pokušao.
HSUS I have attacked ruthlessly.
HSUS sam bezobzirno napadao.
So look, our job is not just to abolish speciesism, abolish meat eating. We have to abolish the systems that are devouring the planet, that are addicted to growth.
Naš cilj nije samo ukidanje specizma i mesojedstva, nego i ukidanje sustava koji su ovisni o rastu i koji uništavaju planet.
So your politics may be very different from mine.
Stoga vaša politika je možda drugčija od moje.
But when I see capitalism, I see a system that is addicted to growth.
Ali kad ja vidim kapitalizam, ja vidim sustav koji je ovisan o
A
rastu.
system based on a grow or die imperative.
Sustav koji se bazira na zapovjedi rasti ili umri.
Now you see this whenever something happens on Wall Street, there's a housing market depression, the whole world market system starts to collapse.
Vidite to svaki put kad na Wall Streetu dođe do neke depresije na tržištu nekretnina, čitavo tržište svjetsko počinje
So
padati.
when it doesn't grow, it dies.
Kada ne raste, umire.
So I'm not only interested in the abolition of meat or the abolition of speciesism,
Ne zanima me samo ukidanje mesojedstva ili specizma.
I'm interested in the abolition of capitalism,
Zanima me ukidanje
the
kapitalizma,
abolition of private property,
privatnog vlasništva,
in the sense that you can control resources that all should share.
u smislu da možete upravljati i imati vlasništvo nad resursima koje
I'm
svi
interested
trebamo
in the
imati.
abolition of the industrial military complex,
Ukidanje tog saveza industrije i vojske
and I'm interested in the abolition of hierarchy.
i ukidanje i aboliciju hijerarhije.
We had to summarize the problems of the world today in one word, and it began with agricultural society. To go back to my beginning, the emergence of hierarchical power systems.
Znači,
Hierarchy.
kada bismo saželi to bit mojeg predavanja u jednu riječ, to je pojava koja se pojavila s pojavom poljoprivrednog društva, a to je pojava hijerarhije.
That's abolitionism, the abolition of hierarchy.
To je abolicionizam, abolicija hijerarhije.